Tom, we have you back here in the tower to talk about recent updates in Spycops. And, actually, before we really get into it, would you be able to give our listeners, perhaps some new listeners, because it's been a year since you've been on, a summation of what is the Spycops case?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the story starts with the exposure, guys, it's 12 years ago now, where an undercover police officer was exposed by activists who he was deployed within, which led to the unraveling of it. Turns out that there was two groups in the British Police, the Special Demonstration Squad and the National Public Order Intelligence Unit, who were sending undercover officers into political protest groups for 5-year deployments from 1968 onwards. These officers would infiltrate the lives of all sorts of progressive groups, anti-war groups, animal rights groups, environmental groups, across the left, interestingly not the far right, and seek to gather intelligence, but would not, also to disrupt, but wouldn't gather evidence for a court case. Unlike normal undercover cops who were deployed, and then there's a day in court and they go, I've got all this evidence. These guys would just deploy for 5 years and then they would disappear and they'd be replaced by somebody else who would carry on that path of deployment. And they've been doing it for since '68, since the a particularly big anti-Vietnam War protest that happened in London. As part of their deployment, it turned out that they were using the identities of dead children, which they were stealing. They were deceiving women into long-term intimate relationships. They were subverting democracy in lots of ways, all sorts of groups that were maybe not considered in any kind of way of a threat by most ordinary people, campaign groups, anything which made the cops look in a bad light. They were infiltrating those groups and behaving very much outside the law. This led to a number of legal cases being brought by women, some of whom had children with these officers, not knowing that they were undercover cops. That led then to a public inquiry being called in 2015. Obviously, with the British justice being the fastest you can buy, it's been 7 years, and we've just got through tranche one of that. I guess that's the short version.
Well, I mean, we shouldn't neglect to mention too that this also, personally affected you.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think it would be worth saying that I think if you were involved in any form of radical politics from 1968 through to 2010, it probably affected you too, but you just don't know it yet.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking everything from sort of the most stuff-shirted Trotskyites to anarchist, green kind of anarchist groups to children's groups to women's groups. Really, I mean, and no group too small either. I mean, some of these organizations had 20 people in them.
Yeah, I mean, some of them had 3, and they were I mean, particularly when they were infiltrating the Maoists, they were splits upon splits, which led to undercover cops setting up their own little parties with 2 other people, whose the entire role of the party was to denounce the other parties. I mean, just some real classic sort of leftist infighting information we've got through this process of looking.
I think one thing too that's really marked the what makes the Spycops case so unique in terms of comparing it to similar cases in the U.S. with how the police has infiltrated leftist groups is the role that these cops played, marrying women, having children with women, having these kind of complete and total double lives and infiltrating social circles in a way that was just completely and totally, I think, just traumatic and destructive and horrific on so many different levels. There's been a number of women that have come forward to kind of give testimony during the course of these inquiries, right?
Yeah, there has. In fact, some of them have just published some books, which are well worth your time. If Small Town Girl by Donna McLean and Deep Deception by Helen Steele, Alison, Belinda, and Lisa, which both are well worth reading. I mean, essentially, the whole sort of story was broken open by these women. In some cases, these men, part of the relationships weren't like some sort of collateral sort of intrusion has been suggested by the cops. It would appear this was the tactic with which to very deeply embed these officers into groups very quickly through these relationships. So they would target these women with being the sort of ideal partner to these women. So obviously when they left, there was a lot of trauma about how they left, which led some of these women to spend years trying to find them afterwards, which led them on to just come up with the idea that maybe these men had been undercover cops. It took them in some cases decades to get to a point where this was confirmed, and they were no longer thought of as mad by their friends and family, and is actually completely true and a matter of public record.
God, I mean, that's just like trauma heaped on trauma, heaped on fucking. I mean, that would drive anyone insane.